Bola Ahmed Tinubu won the most disputed presidential election in Nigeria's recent history, with less than 37% of the vote. And yet, the men who are destroying his presidency are not in the opposition. They are inside his own government, inside his own party. Some of them sat on the same campaign stage with him. Here's what nobody is asking. If Tinubu is this powerful, the Jagaban, the godfather of Lagos, the man who single-handedly installed president, why does his own administration feel like it's being eaten from the inside? There are 12 distinct agendas, not protests, not bad luck, agendas working simultaneously to hollow out his leadership. Some are deliberate, some are structural, and one of them, you're going to be surprised who is behind it. Stay with me. Before we go deeper, if you're just finding Niger Newsfeed, welcome. This channel exists to break down what's really happening in Nigerian politics without the noise, without the spin. Hit subscribe and stay with me because this one gets interesting. Let's set the foundation, because to understand the 12 agendas, you have to understand the context Tinubu walked into and the context he helped create. Tinubu became president in May 2023. On his first day, he announced the removal of the petrol subsidy, a policy that had cushioned ordinary Nigerians from global fuel prices for decades. That single sentence, "subsidy is gone," triggered a chain reaction that is still detonating today. Fuel prices tripled, transport costs exploded, food inflation hit levels Nigeria hasn't seen in a generation. Then came the Naira redesign fallout, the floating of the exchange rate, the collapse of the Naira to over 1,500 to the dollar at its lowest points, policies that hit the middle class and the poor simultaneously. Now, independently, some economists argue those were necessary reforms, but here's the political reality. When you inflict that much pain on a population that didn't overwhelmingly vote for you, you create enemies before you've even unpacked your bags at Aso Rock. And those enemies, they didn't sit quietly. They organized, they funded, they moved. The trigger event that crystallized all 12 agendas into one moment was the hashtag End Bad Governance protests of August 2024, the first time in years that Nigerians from the north, south, east, and west were on the streets simultaneously. That protest was both genuine and manipulated, and understanding the difference between those two things is the key to this entire video. But the protests were just the surface. Underneath, 12 separate power structures were already in motion. Let me walk you through each one. Before we name the 12 agendas, let's understand the institutional architecture, because these agendas operate through institutions. The presidency under the 1999 Nigerian Constitution is extremely powerful on paper. The president controls federal appointments, security agencies, the budget, and by extension, enormous economic patronage. But here's the flaw in the design. Power in Nigeria is not just constitutional, it's transactional. It runs on loyalty purchased with access, contracts, and protection. When Tinubu came in, he inherited a bureaucracy loyal to Buhari, a deep state of permanent secretaries, agency heads, and military brass whose primary allegiance was to the previous arrangement. Replacing them takes time. In that window, things leak, things slow down, things get sabotaged. Then there's the National Assembly, a bicameral legislature that is technically APC-controlled, but it has its own power brokers. Senate Breast Speaker Okpabio and Speaker Abbas are allies, but they're not servants. They have their own ambitions. They control their own networks. The state governors, especially the APC governors, are constitutionally independent. Nigeria runs a federal system. Governors control massive resources, and some of them are already positioning for 2027. That means their loyalty to Tinubu is conditional and declining. And critically, the judiciary. The 2023 election petitions went to the Supreme Court, and while Tinubu won, the process left scars. Legitimacy questions don't disappear with a court ruling, they go underground. Gray area being exploited. The Constitution doesn't clearly define the boundary between presidential directive and executive overreach. Tinubu has tested that boundary several times, and each time it created an opening for opponents. Here's where this gets uncomfortable.
Because several of these agendas are being run by people who are publicly praising Tinubu while privately working against him. Let's go through them. 12 agendas. Some overlap, all of them are real. Agenda 1. The 2027 decapitation strategy. The moment Tinubu won in 2023, the 2027 campaign began against him. Key political figures, some within APC, started positioning. The goal is not to oppose him openly yet. It's to weaken him so that by mid-2026, he looks too damaged to run again or can be forced into a single-term agreement. Watch the rhetoric around zoning and equity. That's the coded language of this agenda. Agenda 2. The Northern Establishment Withdrawal. Tinubu's victory broke an unwritten rule. Many Northern power brokers felt the presidency should have returned north after Buhari. Their support from Arewa elites was always transactional, not ideological. As economic pain deepened in the north, those elites quietly withdrew their political cover. Without Northern elite consensus, no Nigerian president governs comfortably. This is a structural vulnerability Tinubu has never fully resolved. Agenda 3. The Peter Obi/Labour Party pressure campaign. The Labour Party and its obedient movement didn't disappear after losing. They became a permanent pressure campaign, holding Tinubu to a standard he never invited and amplifying every failure on social media, in civil society, and internationally. This isn't just opposition politics, it's a sustained legitimacy war, and it's working, particularly among urban youth and the diaspora. Agenda 4. The Atiku faction's long game. Atiku Abubakar has lost the presidential election multiple times, but he controls significant political capital in the north and within PDP. His strategy isn't to defeat Tinubu at the polls immediately, it's to keep the legitimacy question alive, drain Tinubu's political energy in court and in the media, and position himself or a proxy for 2027. The PDP court cases aren't just legal, they are political theater designed to keep the stolen election narrative alive. Agenda 5. The subsidy removal backlash economy. This is the only agenda without a human architect. It's structural. The removal of fuel subsidy and the Naira float were bold reforms, but the economic pain they caused created a self-reinforcing political crisis. When people cannot afford food, they don't care about macroeconomic theory. They blame whoever is in power. Every food price increase is a political attack that no opponent had to organize. Agenda 6 involves someone very close to Tinubu, someone whose name you won't hear in mainstream coverage. We'll get there. Agenda 6. The intra-APC sabotage network. This is the one that rarely gets discussed openly. Inside APC, there are governors, senators, and party officials who publicly support Tinubu but are quietly frustrating his agenda. Contract awards are delayed, policy implementation is slow-walked, information is leaked to the press at strategic moments. This isn't incompetence, some of it is deliberate. Political sabotage from within is historically Nigeria's most effective weapon. Tinubu used it against others, now it's being used against him. Agenda 7. The security state's ambiguity. Nigeria's military and security apparatus, the DSS, the army, the police, serve the presidency in theory, but institutional loyalties are complex. Some senior figures have closer ties to previous administrations or to political patrons outside Tinubu's circle. The handling of the #EndBadGovernance protest, where soldiers appeared on the streets in some states, raised questions about who was giving orders and why. A president who cannot fully trust his security services is a president walking on glass. Agenda 8. The media and civil society offensive. There is a well-funded, well-organized media operation running against Tinubu. Some of it is legitimate journalism, some of it is sponsored content dressed as journalism. The distinction matters, but the cumulative effect doesn't care about the distinction. Every negative headline compounds. International media picked up the protest story. Amnesty International published reports. The World Bank issued warnings. The narrative around Tinubu internationally now has significantly damaged, and that affects foreign investment, diaspora confidence, and diplomatic relationships. Here's what most analysts miss. Agenda 9 isn't about defeating Tinubu. It's about something far more valuable than the presidency. The Lagos Succession War. Tinubu's political base, his financial lifeline, his identity is Lagos. But his departure to Abuja created a power vacuum in Lagos that is actively being contested. Factions within the Lagos APC machine are fighting over his political inheritance in the state. If Tinubu loses control of Lagos, he loses his bargaining chip, his fundraising base, and ultimately his leverage over the National Party. This is the war being fought quietly in Ikeja and Lekki boardrooms right now. Agenda 10, the governance competence question. This agenda requires honesty. Beyond the opposition, beyond sabotage, some of Tinubu's challenges are self-inflicted. A cabinet that took months to constitute, policy announcements that reversed within days, communication from the presidency that ranged from tone-deaf to absent during national crises, a president who was perceived to be traveling excessively while...
There is a genuine international dimension to this story, so we can't skip it. The United Kingdom and the United States both have complicated relationships with Tinubu. There were pre-election concerns raised in Western capitals about his background, the Chicago drug case, the forfeiture settlement. Those concerns didn't block his inauguration, but they created a ceiling on the warmth of the diplomatic relationship. The IMF and World Bank have been cautiously supportive of the subsidy removal and exchange rate reforms. Those were things Bretton Woods institutions had been pushing Nigeria to do for years. But they've also flagged concerns about the social impact of those reforms without adequate safety nets. Nigeria's social investment programs, the palliatives announced after subsidy removal, were widely seen as poorly targeted and insufficient. On ECOWAS, Tinubu's handling of the Niger coup in 2023 was one of his most consequential early decisions. He pushed aggressively for military intervention, but ECOWAS ultimately backed down. That episode cost him credibility within the regional bloc and among the Nigerian military establishment, some of whom were uncomfortable with the war rhetoric. For Nigerians in the diaspora, particularly in the UK and US, the question is straightforward. Does investing back home make sense under this administration? The Naira devaluation has paradoxically increased remittance values in Naira terms, but political instability makes long-term investment decisions harder. Let me address what people are getting wrong on both sides. Misconception 1. Tinubu is finished. Not yet. Nigeria's political history is full of presidents who looked finished at the midpoint and recovered. Obasanjo faced a removal threat in his second term. Jonathan survived significant opposition until he didn't. Tinubu still controls enormous levers: federal appointments, security services formally, infrastructure spending, and party machinery. He is weakened, not defeated. Misconception 2. The opposition is coordinated and principled. Some of it is. A lot of it is not. Several of the loudest critics of Tinubu's administration are former beneficiaries of exactly the kind of corruption and misgovernance they are now denouncing. The Labour Party movement has genuine grassroots energy, but its leadership has its own internal contradictions. Opposition in Nigeria is often united only by the desire to be in power, not by a coherent alternative vision. Misconception 3. If Tinubu falls, things will get better. This is the most dangerous misconception. Nigeria's structural problems, the oil dependency, the weak institutions, the ethnic fragmentation, the security challenges, do not change with the occupant of Aso Rock. The 12 agendas we've discussed, most of them would transfer to whoever replaced Tinubu, because they are not really about Tinubu, they are about who controls Nigeria's resources and political future. The strongest opposition argument, and where it partially holds, the case that Tinubu's administration has been too slow, too opaque, and too tolerant of corruption within its own ranks, is not without merit. The Emefiele saga, the fuel subsidy payment controversies, the question of whether the subsidy was actually removed or just restructured, these are legitimate governance failures that deserve serious accountability. Acknowledging that isn't bias, it's honesty. So where does this go from here? Let me give you 3 scenarios. Most likely scenario: managed survival. Tinubu models through. He makes enough strategic appointments and political deals to hold his coalition together. The economy slowly stabilizes as global oil prices remain favorable. He runs in 2027 as an incumbent with a track record, flawed but present. The opposition remains fragmented and fails to coalesce around a single candidate. He wins a second term with less than 40% of the vote again. Nigeria continues in its current trajectory, frustrating, unequal, but holding together. The escalation scenario. The economy deteriorates significantly. A major security incident, large-scale protest, a regional crisis, or military pressure forces a political rupture. APC governors publicly break with Tinubu, the National Assembly begins impeachment proceedings or creates a constitutional crisis. This scenario is unlikely but not impossible, and the signals to watch are APC governors making joint public statements without Aso Rock directive? Are the military making statements independent of presidential command? The reform scenario, best case. Tinubu's economic reforms begin to show results by late 2025 into 2026. Inflation moderates, foreign reserves stabilize, a visible infrastructure project, the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway, for example, creates a political win. He uses that momentum to consolidate his base, bring the northern establishment back on side with strategic concessions, and heads into 2027 from a position of relative strength. This requires things to go right that have mostly gone wrong so far. Agenda 6, the intra-APC sabotage, is the deciding variable. If Tinubu cannot neutralize his internal enemies, none of the 3 scenarios end well for him. Agenda 12, the health narrative, could collapse the entire structure overnight if it becomes undeniable. That's why the administration's opacity on this issue is itself a political liability. We opened with a question. If Tinubu is the most politically experienced person to ever sit in Aso Rock, why does his presidency feel like it's being eaten alive? Here's your answer. Because political skill that was built on Lagos is not automatically transferable to Nigeria. Lagos is one state with manageable complexity. Nigeria is 36 states, 250-plus ethnic groups, competing regional agendas, a broken economy, and a political class that eats its own. The 12 agendas are not destroying Tinubu because he's weak, they are destroying him because he's president of a country where the system itself is designed to exhaust